fly for fun and enjoy it. I don't go 1,000 miles an hour in a fighter jet, but I'm still flying in the air and I can go wherever I want, whenever I want. So that's pretty good. Hey guys, my name is Christian Dale. So Tyler and I, we went to college together. I live down in Texas now, and I got my license right after college. I've been flying a lot. Really something I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. I grew up in Wisconsin, going to EAA every year since I was probably about 5 years old. And when I got out of high school, I was looking at going into the military route. It was around the time where they were really transitioning over to drones. And when I looked at the numbers, there's about a 5% chance going in to be able to fly in the Air Force, about a 15% chance in the Navy. And I really didn't want to chance it and end up at a desk job. So I figured, okay, well, I'll go in, I'll get my engineering degree, something where I can, make money. And then the first thing I'm going to do when I get out, and I have the ability to, I'm going to go get my license. So that's what I did. I got my license probably about a year. I started about a year after I got out. It takes about anywhere from maybe 6 months to a year to get your license, and there's a lot of different licenses you can get. I just got the first one, which was a VFR license. So that's what I have right now, and I still hold VFR license. Additionally, down the road, I did get high performance, which is what I need for this aircraft, and a G1000 checkout, which is really just for the glass cockpit, the new fancy tech. Did some flying when I lived in Wisconsin. I was with a group there, and then most recently, I've purchased an aircraft about a year ago. We added a couple partners to that. We now have a group of 4, and we fly for fun and enjoy it. I don't go 1,000 miles an hour in a fighter jet, but I'm still flying in the air, and I can go wherever I want, whenever I want. So that's pretty good. I can't complain.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wanna understand what it took to get this license, because I've heard a lot of, you have to. It sounds like you bought a flight, but normally you're buying into partial ownership of a flight. You have to do all this training. You have to kind of maintain your license by getting so many hours in. But aside from those little bits, I don't have any idea what it takes to get a license and maintain one.
Cool. Yeah, I can go into that a little bit. So there's really 2 paths I always look at with licenses, and there's a bunch of licenses you have to get as you work your way up if you're trying to go commercial. And the paths that I look at is there's a Part 61 type license and a Part 141 type license. And Part 61 is like, hey, this guy's an instructor. You guys get together, you buddy up, and you go and you fly, and he teaches you how to fly. And when he feels that you're ready to go, after you've gone through your book work and your flight training, he's going to hand you off to a FAA examiner who's going to give you your official test. And then, if you pass that, then you have your license. With a 141 type license, it's a lot more structured. So it's like going back to school, really. There's classes. It's still one-on-one with an instructor, but it's very rigid. There's, stage exams, stage tests that you have to go through up until you get to the end. So it's a lot better training. And because of that, if you're someone who's looking to go into the airlines, they typically recommend doing 141 license. Additionally, the minimum number of hours that are required, they only require 1,000 hours to go into the airlines versus 1,500 hours if you're going through a Part 61 route. So you can spend a little bit extra money up front getting the 141 license and to be a little more rigorous, and you don't have to fly that additional 500 hours, which might save you some money. So that's the advantage with those. There's a lot of licenses that you kind of get throughout the way. It's kind of like steps. So you start out with your VFR license, and your VFR license is visual flight rules. It means that I can go fly a plane, real basic plane, under 200 horsepower, tricycle landing gear, and I can fly on a nice sunny day, right? I cannot fly through the clouds. I can fly if there's clouds around, but I have to maintain my distance. I can fly above clouds. I can fly below clouds, but I can't fly through them. And that's kind of restricted there. So I always think like fair weather flyer, if you're a VFR flyer. Mm-hmm. You're looking for those better days. It can be windy, but as long as it's within your wind constraints you have on the aircraft. So certain aircraft can handle more of a crosswind than others, or handle more wind in your experience as well and what you're comfortable with. Just because the airplane can do something doesn't mean you want to put yourself in that situation. The next license that most people get is IFR, or Instrument Flight Rules. What that usually means is you're relying solely on your instruments to fly. You're not actually looking outside the plane, and that license then kind of gets you that, more so allowed to fly through the clouds. And you're on a much more structured flight plan when you're going from point A to point B. It's not just like, hey, I'm going to go fly around and enjoy myself. No, I'm going from here to here. I'm taking off at this point. I'm landing at this point. It's good in that way because you do get priority as an airplane over VFR aircraft. But there's more training involved and there's more structure involved, and the plane also has to be capable for that too. We'll get to it later, but the aircraft that I'm currently flying right now is not IFR capable. It's missing some avionics equipment, and that's what we're actually working to install over the next year to get us back up to that criteria. So we have that capability, and then I'll be getting my IFR along with that, so then I can then utilize that and fly through the clouds. So that's kind of where I'm looking at next in my stage. I'm a relatively young pilot. I'd say I'm sitting around about 250 hours. So for a pilot, while that seems like a lot of hours, for someone who's GA, especially at my age, GA just flying casually, it's a good amount. But for a commercial pilot, that's very, very low. You talk to commercial pilots that have 3, 4, 5,000 hours, sometimes up to 10,000 or more hours if they're an older pilot. Like I said, you have to have at least 1,000 to get into the airlines. So yeah, those are the first two stages, and then it kind of goes in, I don't say like different routes, but there's multi-engine, which is like another certification to fly an aircraft with 2 engines. There's CFI, or Certified Flight Instructor, which is what most people will typically work towards if they're going to the airlines, because they need to get hours and they can use training or being a CFI to help train other people, and they can get hours through that, which is not at their cost of flying. It's at the person who's training. So that's kind of what people do if they're able to do that. You want to become a pilot, I'm a CFI, I'm trying to build hours. I'll go train you, and then you're learning how to fly, you're getting that benefit. And you're probably paying me maybe, $50 an hour, $25 an hour is maybe what I'm getting from the flight school. So I'm not really making a ton of money. And I'm only working a couple of hours here and there. I'm not working a full 40-hour typically. But I'm building hours, right? And I'm building hours towards flight school, towards airlines. So that's my advantage that I get.
Is that something you think you'll pursue in the future, or are you kind of just taking it a day at a time and worrying about this instrument license to start with?
Yeah. For me, I have my own career. I'm doing very well in that. I have my own, path I'm carving out. So for me, this is for fun. And I'll probably look to stick with the IFR. I'll stay there for a while. If the finances work out, maybe I'll look into multi if I can afford that. It gets pretty expensive once you're starting to get to bigger aircraft. And right now I'm in a really good sweet spot where I can fly comfortably and really enjoy it and not really think about the expenses as much, if that makes some sense. Because that's really, I was talking actually with one of my partners, and we're like, well, we can get bigger aircraft, but then now we're paying a lot more. Now we're thinking about, okay, well, I want to go here, and that's going to cost me this much, rather than, hey, let's just go flying and go have fun. It's a little different mindset. And if you're very affluent and you have tons of money, then you probably don't worry about it either way. But it's just something that where I'm at and where we're at, we're a little more conscious of.
Yeah. So when you first got your license, you did not own a plane. You were just renting one to fly up near college. But now you moved down to Texas. You actually purchased a plane. Can you tell us what goes into maintaining that, and how you're bringing these partners on to kind of dampen the financial load of it all?
Yeah. So just broad scope, I started renting aircraft. That was when I was training and going through that. And a lot of people do rent aircraft after they get their license. The problem with that is that renting is very restrictive. So, you have to be typically checked out in the aircraft. So you have to go up with this company, and I'll check out in a 172, a Cessna. And then I can, with an instructor for an hour, and then I can go and fly it on my own. So it's not like I can just go and grab any plane and if I'm certified to fly, go and fly, they typically want to do a checkout with you. And then that's well and all, and you got a fee, which is it's roughly, it's comparable. But if you want to do anything long term or overnight, that's where it becomes very difficult and expensive. Typically, they'll require that you fly at least 4 hours a day if you're taking the aircraft for the entire day, and that's not necessarily something you want to do. You don't maybe for me to get from even from Madison up to Tech is only a 2 hour flight. So then I'd have to find another 2 hours to spend somewhere else, going around in circles. And really, at that point, it feels like you're kind of wasting gas and spending money for no reason. And it's something that you have to really coordinate in advance. So the most optimal way to go is to become part of an ownership group, and that's what I started doing in Madison. I joined a group there. They had 3 aircraft and 30 people, 30 members. The 10-to-1 ratio is kind of the golden ratio as far as insurance goes. If you go any more than that, insurance hikes, and it's not very favorable. And when you get into aircraft, you really start to learn that insurance kind of runs everything. They determine what you're allowed to fly, what you're not allowed to fly, and when you can fly certain aircraft, and that kind of aspect. So, I might be able to be trained up to fly like a Kodiak or a Phenom and like light jet per se, right? But if I've got no hours, they're not going to let me fly. They're going to be like, no, you need to go get more hours. And I know there's a story of a guy who had a Kodiak. He was affluent and he wanted to do YouTubing, and he bought a Kodiak and he had the license for it, but insurance wouldn't let him fly. So he had somebody else flying his plane for him while he shot his videos or something like this, because he wasn't allowed to fly it until he could build up enough hours to then finally be able to fly his own plane. So just because you can afford and you can own it doesn't mean you can fly it.
Gotcha.
So
then you moved
there,
down to Texas.
Yep.
You I assume you backed out of that partnership that you're in. You moved down to Texas, and I mean, when you're going to buy a plane, is it like buying a car? Are you financing this thing and then trying to find people to onboard with it?
It's a lot more like buying a house than buying a car. So I moved down to Texas after about a couple of years in Madison. And, I was able to offload my share pretty quickly. They had a wait list, so it was a matter of just go to the wait list. First person you call, yep, I want it. Here's the price. And there we kind of set our own prices, so we were able to do that. When you do buy a share, you do have to physically buy a share or a share of the aircraft, and that can be 1/10 of the value or a portion of the value of the aircraft or whatever is set based on what group you're joining. So that's just something to keep in mind, and you kind of have this holding investment there. When I got down to Texas, I started looking around. I was looking at aircraft, a partnership that already existed. They were doing an engine overhaul. So after about 2,000 hours, they typically recommend doing an overhaul where you either do a heavy maintenance on the engine, and it's usually in the neighborhood of $40,000 to $50,000 to do, or you completely replace the engine. And that's very typical. That's all aircraft. They usually have a TBO, a time before overhaul, and once they hit TBO, if they're not making compressions, they'll overhaul the engine. Sometimes you can go past TBO, which is nice, but there's no guarantee at that point.
Right.
So I followed that for 6 months, expecting to get the aircraft and get the share. When I got closer and the plane was finally up and running, the guy kind of price gouged me and said, "Well, I want way more money than the share was worth, or the aircraft valuation of that was worth." And he said he had other people, so ultimately the deal fell through. And I said, "I'll go find my own way, or I'll go find another alternative." That being said, got back on Facebook, started asking around any other clubs, ran into another gentleman who was also in a similar situation, and we started talking. We said, "Hey, in our part of Texas where we're at, there's really no clubs here. What if we just start our own?" And that's kind of where things started. You get online, you start looking at Trade-A-Plane or controller websites. ASO is another website, and Aircraft Shoppers Online. And you start looking at planes, find something that looks like what you want. You're looking at the avionics, you're looking at the age of the plane, and the condition of it. And then if it's something you're interested in, you reach out and start having those discussions. we had looked at a couple aircraft. It was coming out of COVID time, so the biggest concern is aircraft not flying. We had looked at a Grumman. It hadn't flown for almost 2 years, and there was a potential for corrosion. And if you have corrosion, you're basically doing an overhaul, and we wouldn't take that chance. Part of buying a plane is you typically do a pre-inspection, kind of like a pre-inspection on a house. And
Right.
just like in the housing market, people were forgoing inspections and they were putting cash down and over asking. So it was one of those things of like, I'm not going to buy a plane for at value cost and then suddenly buy it, realize that there's corrosion, and have to do a whole overhaul and not have the plane for another 6 months or however long it's going to be. I'd rather be able to do that pre-inspection. And people were just forgoing it and just, I'll just buy the plane and deal with it because I want a plane. And we weren't about that. We had talked to a guy over in California. He was getting rid of a Cessna 182, and Cessna 182s, they're a really great aircraft because they have a good amount of performance, but they have a really good useful load. So they can carry a lot. They can carry 4 people, and you can go places with it. It's a very practical aircraft, and it's also pretty efficient cost-wise to run. So that's why people really like them, and they're really popular. So he was going through a deal. The deal ended up falling through, and he gave us a phone call back, and we said we were interested, and we decided to move forward. Flew out there the first time, took a look at it. Everything looked to be what we were looking for. We ended up taking it to do a pre-inspection. We did that, and we ultimately ended up buying the plane and flying it home. So Jared and I, my partner, we picked up the plane in Monterey, and we flew it all the way back down, spent the night in Phoenix, and then back down to Texas, to Dallas. So that was a fun trip there.
That's really cool. That's like the competitiveness of the housing market, but then also being able to just drive it home.
Yeah.
We were kind of talking before call, and you were telling me that a lot of times you're using these planes either in Wisconsin or down in Texas to just do these day trips, and maybe that's because of the license you currently have. Maybe it's just because how you like to fly, but I want to know what goes into kind of planning out a day trip, and like how quickly can you go from being sitting there at your chair to in the air on your way to whatever.
So it really depends on what I'm doing. Something like a day trip, the reason I do day trips and they're easy is because it doesn't require a lot of planning. And I can go after work and go on a day trip. Last week I went out to Wood County, and it was a matter of I'm texting one of the guys and say, hey, you want to go fly? The weather's perfect right now. Everything's lined up, and nobody's got the plane booked. I'll see you at 4 at the airport, and go over there, pre-flight for half hour, and get up in the air and fly over and call it, grab some dinner and fly back. It was actually really easy. Sometimes,
So do you have your own entrance when you're driving over there?
Yeah.
Like, do you have to go through TSA or anything? Like, how quickly can you just like hop in the plane and get it in the air? Like, what do you have to do once you get to it?
Yeah, so it's a little different based on the airports. When I was in Wisconsin at those airports, Class Charlie airports are different, a little bit larger airports than where I'm currently at. And you actually had to go in and go basically to TSA and get a badge. So when you look at people like that work at the airport and they all have their badges, I had a badge for, a pilot or for GA pilot, so private pilot, saying that I'm allowed to go into certain areas. I'm not allowed to walk into the sterile area, which would be the area after TSA, but I am allowed to kind of go over onto the grounds. Typically it's where the fixed base operator FBO is, where I would keep my aircraft. I can go over there. I can see my plane. I can walk out on the ramp over there. I can't really be by the commercial aircraft, but I can be taxiing in the areas and things like that. I have those kind of privileges. I can walk to my hangar. I can stay at my hangar and work. If you aren't wearing your badge or you don't have a badge in those areas, it can be pretty severe as far as the consequences goes. I know from Madison, it was, if you didn't have your badge, it was a $12,000 fine. And if you were escorting someone and that somebody walked off, they'd issue both you and him a $12,000 fine. So, and they were very, they did, they didn't really care. They were very open to do that if they wanted to. It wasn't something where it was this is the top end. It was like, no, this is what you're going to get. You don't do that. So you just didn't take those kind of risks. Now, compared to where I'm at now in a smaller airport, it is gated. The whole area is gated. It is monitored, but I don't need a badge where I'm at, so I can go up. I have a access code I use. Type into the gate. It gets me in onto the grounds, and then I can drive around, and I have that kind of access. Go over to my hangar, and it's airports and aviation's pretty small in that world. So typically, if you live at an airport, especially, the security guy's going to see the first couple of times, and he'll know who you are, and it's everyone's pretty comfortable with everybody. Everybody knows everybody. So if somebody's not supposed to be there, it typically stands out. Yeah.
And then you just walk up to the hangar and, open the doors, turn the key, and you're off?
Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of.
Okay.
But to that degree, yeah. So in the case of last week, Monday, we met up probably around 4 o'clock. We both have access because he's another shareholder of our aircraft. And unlock it, pull the plane out of the hangar. You do a pre-flight. So you go around, initially you'll drop the flaps, you'll turn the lights on, make sure everything works. And then you'll go around and you'll look at the aircraft for any potential damage, any issues, anything, with your surfaces, or even things like loose bolts. I mean, just anything that could be wrong. You'll check your oil, you'll check your fuel, you'll check your fuel for fuel contamination as well. So there's these ports that you'll use, and you'll drain fluid out of, and you can look at it and determine if the fuel's good or if it's contaminated. If it's dirt in it, if it's not the right color. So different fuel has different colors. So typically, most people or GA are using 100 low lead, which is blue. And if it's not blue, or if it's like a tan color is like a Jet A or your jet fuel, you don't want to be running that, and you'll need to go through the drain your tanks and all that. So you always check that kind of stuff. If there's water in your tanks, you want to know that as well. That can be a bad time. You go through all those checks. It usually takes you about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on what level of experience you have doing it and how well you know your plane. And then you go in, you'd start up, and you go through your checklist, your pre-flight discussions if you need any of that. You contact the tower, you taxi out, you do what's called a run-up. So right before you take off, you will actually run up the RPMs on an aircraft. You'll check some of the surfaces, you'll check some of the functionality, check your magnetos, things like that. And if everything is good to go, then you'll go ahead and take off. So a little bit of a process, but you can get up in the air, I'd say 30 to 45 minutes after arriving is what I usually expect. And I'm slow. I take my time. I'm sure people can do that faster if they want to.
Okay. And then what do you have to do to plan your landing? So it's probably pretty smooth sailing once you're up in the air. You got your instrumentation to make sure there's no one else around you, but how are you calling in to land? And what does that process look like?
Yeah, so great question. So when you're in the air, there's different kind of airspaces, and based on the airspace, it kind of dictates how you're going to come in and land, or even take off for that matter. So going through it to kind of keep it brief, your Class A or Class Alpha airspace is everything above 18,000 feet. That's where all the airliners sit. They kind of have their own space. You have the main space, which is Echo, and then at the very bottom, about 1,200 feet above the ground, is called Gulf, or no man's land, is what I kind of think about it. But then when you get around airports, you have, Bravo airspace, which is for the big airports like DFW or Chicago, which is 30-mile radius. You have Charlie, which is for mid-sized airports. So think like, I'd say like Madison, Wisconsin would be a Class Charlie airport. Let's see, what's over your neck of the woods? Midland, Michigan.
Detroit, Flint. Probably Flint.
Yeah. I don't know if Flint is. I know Detroit would probably be a Bravo. That's a bigger airport. So it's kind of like your mid-grade airports. Your smaller airports, which may or may not even have a terminal, or probably Delta. Those would be the other ones. So based on what airspace you're trying to go into or where you're trying to land, you're going to need certain things and different procedures. But a lot of it does require, contacting the tower and getting, that kind of permission to get in for the most part. So whether it's just establishing communications or actually getting permission to enter that airspace, like in Bravo airspace, for example. So there's three ways I always think about flying. You can fly, kind of uncontrolled, if you want to call it that, where you take off, you talk with your tower or the local air traffic around the airport, you get up and you're flying in, class Echo airspace, and you're just having a good time, you're doing your own thing. I typically never fly that way. It's just because no one's really looking at you. There's no one to kind of watch out for you. And what's really easy to do is request flight following, which basically means that I want someone to keep an eye on me. So what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I'm going from here to here, and I'd like flight following. And they're going to give me a code, my transponder, my squawk code. And they will then be able to track me as I'm flying around doing whatever I want to do. If I want to go practice, I might maintain a squawk code until I get out there, or even when I'm doing practice, I might have to maintain that code. But then they can tell me, hey, there's a plane coming over here, or hey, watch out for this, or they can even see like birds sometimes on the radar, like a flock of birds, and they'll say, hey, there's a flock of birds, or things like that, which is really helpful and useful, and it makes you a safe pilot. The third way you can travel is by filing a flight plan. I think it's too much work, to be honest. I know they've made a lot of improvements on it, but it's very rigid, and when you open your flight plan, you have to land within 30 minutes of your target time. And if you don't, then that's when they start really looking for you. So they'll start by calling the airport. They'll send a squad car out there. They'll send Civil Air Patrol out. They'll start looking for you. They will find you. Hell or high water, they will find you. But it's very rigid, and you have to make sure that you close your flight plan afterwards, and everything's good to go. Or if you're running late, you have to let them know. Otherwise, they're going to start sending everybody out to look for you. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you're picking the second one, and you're kind of getting watched, and then they kind of help bring you down when it's safe for you to land, or when it's your turn for you to land.
So when I'm looking to come and land, they'll transfer me over to the tower. And whenever they transfer me, they're going to call up the tower initially and say, hey, I got this plane coming in. He's looking to land. He's got the latest weather. And this is what he is, and, kind of where he's coming from. And what altitude he's at. And then they'll transfer you over, and you'll call your name out, or your end number out, your aircraft number out. When you get onto the new frequency, he'll acknowledge that, and he'll know what to do with you, kind of thing. When you come into smaller airports that are not towered, it's a little bit different of a process. So when you have airport in sight, the person that is monitoring you on flight following will kind of confirm that, says, are you good? And then he'll give you permission to leave his frequency. And at that point, he will kick you over to kind of that uncontrolled squawk VFR, or 1200, which means I'm just a plane flying around. And then at that point, you'll actually have a common traffic frequency, which you'll call up, and that'll be for that airport. That airport will run on, 122.8. Anybody who's landed there, you got to use this frequency and communicate with each other. And you'll communicate with other pilots and kind of coordinate landing and whatnot. Same thing with taking off in those kind of plane airspaces.
I would imagine that's what the Houghton Airport is, like just a tiny frequency. There's no real runway or anything.
Yeah. Houghton actually, I'm trying to remember. I think, no, they did kick me off, I think, for that one. I don't think they have there's no tower watching. So when I got up there, I did fly out of there
Go ahead, sorry.
I did fly up there a few years ago, so it was a kind of a fun trip. Flew down the portage, was kind of fun.
I flew out there once for an interview, and it was like the TSA and baggage check was one room, and like you sit on one side, you check in on the other side, and then you walk out of the building, and they had a ladder up to the plane. It was bizarre.
Yeah.
Smallest airport I've ever flown out of.
It's different,
but
it's kind of fun though, It's a unique experience.
Yeah, it was really cool. I don't think I ever would have paid for it, but the company I was interviewing with paid for me to fly out of there, so it was perfect.
Yeah, I had
Um,
the opportunity to do a similar experience when I was interviewing with some companies over there, and yeah, it's different. It's kind of fun, but yeah, what is it? 54% of all the flights are canceled out of Houghton. It's one of the
I
highest
did,
cancellations of any airport, or something crazy like this. So yeah,
I don't think I knew
um,
that.
no, I don't need that. I don't need that stress.
So when you kind of went into this a little bit, you talked about a lot of the different frequencies for communications, but what other tools are you using when you're up on the air? I think you mentioned like having your iPad out there for some navigation. I'm just curious what all you're using,
Yeah.
and maybe that gets leveled up when you get that next tiered license. So you can go into that too.
hmm Yeah, so what I'm using right now, I have a very, like I said, the aircraft that we're flying, it's basic, it's VFR only, so we don't have the additional instruments to run IFR, and I can get into that in a little bit. But we've got a normal six pack. Six pack is basically your standard uh, steam gauges, if you call them those, and circular gauges. There's six of them, and then you have some engine gauges. We have a brand new transponder, which gives us that squawk frequency and allows us to see what altitude we're at and how fast we're going and who we are. And then we've got a couple radios and then a mixer, which are also brand new Garmin radios. So, in addition to that, I use an iPad, so it's pretty common. Even if you go flying one day, when you walk into the airplane, take a look to the right inside the cockpit. You might see the guy has his iPad up. Most people use it. Actually, ForeFlight, they've got, I think it's like the civilian, the commercial, and like their military versions, right, of ForeFlight. And it when it came out, it just became the most useful tool you could have. From a planning perspective, typically, you'd spend hours working on charts and mapping out, hey, I'm going from here to here, and here's my alternates, and here's the vector I need to go, and all this kind of stuff, and how long it's going to be on each leg. And it takes a long time. You'll spend, several hours building out a flight plan just to go fly for a day. And ForeFlight's really changed that because it does all those calculations automatically in an app. And now I just put in, hey, I'm going from here to here at this time. I already have my engine or my aircraft specs already mapped into there, and it does all the calculations. It pulls the latest weather from online and calculates that and factors that in. It can tell me my headwind or tailwind, what the best altitude to fly it is at, tells me where the clouds are, all that kind of stuff, and it's instant. Right, so suddenly all those hours I would spend, now I can literally say, hey, I want to go here at this time with this plane, and what am I looking at, right? I know to put together a briefing, which is extraordinarily useful. So I use a
And
lot for planning.
you don't need service for that either because your GPS still works in the sky, right? So you can just pinpoint where you are with everything it's already calculated. Is that kind of how that works?
So when I'm doing the flight planning, I'll need service because it's pulling that weather
Right.
information, all that kind of those details. Uh, Depending on the iPad, so if your iPad has cell, like this one has cell, it will give me, the GPS off the iPad.
Hmm.
But my iPad actually have it set up to connect to the transponder, so it pulls in that transponder data. And what's really
Oh,
cool
okay.
about that is typically you'll have another, panel or a piece of glass or electronics that will show you like where other aircraft are in your vicinity, or they'll show you what the weather is. NexRad satellite radar. It's something that updates every 15 minutes. It can tell you where the rain is and what the storms are and whatnot. It's very useful. Because of the transponder I have, it's a Stratus transponder. It actually pipes that information into my iPad, and ForeFlight's able to see it and overlay that on top of the maps. So I can see my location with the GPS. I can see the weather. I can see all the other aircraft. I can see what they're doing. I can see everything. And that's what makes it, again, such a useful tool, because now I don't have to worry about buying all these other pieces of equipment. I can run most of that on ForeFlight. Granted, it's
Huh.
ForeFlight, so if I want to actually do anything more complex, I actually have to buy that equipment or buy equipment that will allow me to do that. But it does give you the visibility, which is really helpful. So typically, as far as the weather goes, aviationweather.gov is what a pilot would typically use pre-ForeFlight. Now, ForeFlight's actually taking that information right from that website, bringing it right into their own app, and I can review it right there pretty easily. I will say, give them a shout out because they've updated aviationweather.gov with the GFA tool. It's a whole lot better than the what felt like the 1990s version online weather. So, a lot easier to use. So they updated it a few years ago, and it was just a totally different website. That was really good to see. When I get up in the air, I'm using the iPad to not only track, my location, my route, because I'll put in a route and it'll give me a magenta line as far as where to travel. But I'll be tracking other aircraft and the weather as well. So it's really useful not only pre-flight but also in-flight for navigation, a little bit like that.
That's awesome. And I know you were saying that there's some interesting subtle perks that come along with flying. So I don't know if you have a list of those, but some of the ones you were mentioning in the pre-call I thought were worth sharing if you want to get into that.
Sure, yeah. So, aviation is fun. It's a really small community. I think when I did the numbers, it was like 0.18% of all U.S. citizens are pilots or something like that. So there's not a lot of people out there. It's about just around 500,000 people. I think it's like 600,000 aviators, but as far as fixed-wing aircraft pilots, I think it's in the 400s. So just whether you're counting the helicopters and the blimps and everything else, and the hot air balloons and whatnot. So that in mind, what's cool about it is it's a small community, so you do get to know a lot of people, and it's very tight-knit, and everybody kind of helps each other out. One of the cool things I've always enjoyed is the FBOs. If you go into an FBO or a fixed-base operator, they'll typically have something like crew cars, which for the pilots, we can take out and use for a couple hours at a time. And it's not like a rental where you'd be paying into that. It's typically, you sign out, they throw you the keys, you've got about 2 hours. It allows you to go grab dinner or lunch, and then head back, and fuel up if you need to, and be on your way. It's really nice because it's just one less thing you have to worry about, and it allows you to have that flexibility and really enjoyment. Like I said, I go out for dinner, go out for lunch. A month ago, I was in Austin grabbing dinner at a sushi place over there. Flew out there, it was about an hour and 20 each way, and it's a good time. We enjoyed it. Got back at night, watched the sunset. We're flying home. It's kind of fun. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Is that what a lot of your trips are like? Generally, just doing day trips like that?
Yeah, I'd say most of my trips are that kind of way, because it's easy to plan. And like I said, with the VFR license, I am a little bit limited by the weather. So if I see a nice day, like actually today was a pretty good day, you just grab the plane and you go. Whereas if I want to do an overnight or a longer term flight, there's a lot more planning involved. So for instance, a month or so ago, back in April, I flew out to Russellville, Arkansas for the eclipse. And that's one where I was looking at it, kind of a little bit the week before as it was getting closer. I saw that there was a window for me to fly out there, but I was more concerned with my window to get back. I had some phone calls. I actually called, use another perk what you have is 100WX Brief, and that's Lockheed Martin's flight service. And basically you can get on the phone with a meteorologist and talk about your flight and say, hey, I'm seeing this based on what I know. What do you think? And do you think I'm good to fly, or do you think I should be, more cautious about this? Or, what do you see with the weather? Because, they've got a full degree in this, and they're the expert in weather. They can help you navigate that a lot better and be a safer pilot overall. So we had that conversation. I had a window. It's a pretty small window. I had an opportunity to open up. I did decide to go for it with knowing that if I wasn't able to make it back, I'd be stuck in Oklahoma probably for 2 or 3 days before I could get back down to Dallas. And that is one of the disadvantages of having a VFR license and just being a pilot. Is you're in a small aircraft, you're a lot more susceptible to the weather, and you're at the weather's will, versus being in a commercial airliner. They can get through some of that stuff or get around some of that stuff, or get over it, which you can't you can't do as a small aircraft. So yeah.
Are you allowed to fly at night with the current license you have?
Sorry.
Are you allowed to fly at night with the current license you have, or do you
Yeah.
have to have like full visibility?
No, I can fly at night. Actually, that's
Okay.
what I kind of enjoy flying because it's nice, it's peaceful. You get to see all the lights. It's fun, actually.
Right.
Um,
How do you think your flights will change once you get this license upgrade and you get all that extra tooling into your plane? Do you think you'll be doing more longer trips or not so much?
yeah, I'm thinking I'd like to do a few longer trips. I'd like to get out to Florida, get to the coast, spend a few days places. I do have the opportunity to work from home, part of my job, so that would give me the opportunity to go fly out to Florida, spend a few days, go to the beach, get an Airbnb or something like that. I'd leave the plane at an airport, an FBO, and it's usually not too expensive to leave overnight if it costs anything.
Hmm.
And then fly back, when I'm able to or when I want to. And I can have more control of that. Just being with the clouds, being with some of the haze that comes into Texas sometimes, it can really mess up your flight schedule a little bit. That would give me some flexibility there. As far as equipment goes, so what I'm looking at would be I need some additional equipment. I need an actual GPS in the aircraft. So we're looking at like a GPS 175 unit, which is a Garmin unit that actually has, WAS GPS on it. And then that would pipe over to an HSI, which is what you need. It's things for navigation, really. And that would allow you to do that.
Okay.
There are, right now, that would allow us to use GPS for IFR. If we really wanted to be a true IFR aircraft and do training in, we'd need a NavCom rather than just communication. So instead of the communication radios, there's additionally navigation radios. So without trying to get too technical, we have these things called VORs, and basically it's a point on the ground, like a fix, and we can say that we are a certain degree away from that, and sometimes they have distance as well. So we're so many miles away from that point on the ground, and we can tap into them using radio frequencies to access that and see where we are in relationship to those. So typically you would look at two VORs and you could then basically triangulate where you were. And that's how you typically did navigation prior to GPS. So if we really want to be truly full-fledged, we would have to swap out one of our radios. That's not what we're discussing right now. But we've got some upgrades that we're working on, so we're kind of working through those. It's pretty expensive. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars to do these upgrades. So it's one of the things where having partners has made it very doable, rather than taking on the entire cost. Because if I'm going to spend $20,000, that's a large chunk of change for the aircraft. But if there's four of us, now I'm spending $5,000, and I'm getting the same value as, I would have spent the large amount.
And this might be a good segue. We could get into some of the finances of all this if you're comfortable doing so. Like maybe what it took to buy it, maintain it, upgrade it. I know that there's a lot of maintenance you have to do to make sure you're flying safely every time. Yeah.
So aircraft aren't cheap. They are expensive, and there's ways of doing it which is more cost effective than others. I think we talked a little bit about being in an aircraft ownership group, and really what that allows you to do is you're paying a bit more money up front, but think of it more so that you're parking that money. So you're going to park, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on a plane, but that's staying in the plane is part of it's almost like its value, right? It's not necessarily investment. Don't see yourself making money on it, but you're parking that money more so. And being in that then allows you to have that ownership, which then makes the overall hourly cost a lot cheaper. Just based on the way it's structured overall, and you're splitting that ownership cost. And a rental group is going to be making a commission. They're going to be making money on that aircraft. They're going to also have a lot more maintenance on it. When we bought the plane, we got lucky. We actually got it at a fairly good deal. The gentleman had some personal issues going on, and he was just looking to get rid of it. His finances were pretty well off. He lived in Monterey, California, so he was doing pretty all right. And he just didn't want the plane anymore. He wasn't going to be flying it. Figured he was going to buy a different one, and I'll get rid of this one now. I'll buy another plane in a year from now. Was kind of his plan. So we got into it. In the positive, the plane was. I'd say he could probably got another 20, 30,000 out of the plane if he wanted to, which was a large chunk of change. Though when we did purchase the plane, we kind of bought it knowing that there was a bit of work that it would need it. So right off the bat, we had we brought it home. We went through our annual service. Every year you have to go through an annual maintenance. I'm actually we're about to go into that in a couple weeks from now. And they look over the entire aircraft, the engines, they look at compressions, they kind of pull everything apart, make sure we're good to go for the next year. And it takes about 2 weeks. And we got into our annual, our first year, knowing that was going to be an expensive one. And definitely did. We had to replace the entire exhaust on the aircraft. We had to do the wing bolts, which came in a lot more expensive than we expected. But the engine was good, and that was the big one. That was the $40,000 question. We still put probably, I'll just say it's over 10 grand into an annual, into just getting it up and running. Funny thing we found was the spark plugs that they were using were military surplus spark plugs from 1945. They're old World War II spark plugs, and they still have them. You can buy them on Spruce. They just haven't got rid of them because we made that many spark plugs in World War II. They work. They're not as efficient. We definitely noticed that when we were flying. We swapped them out. We put in modern-day spark plugs, which are a little bit better, and we don't have any of the issues that we could potentially have with fouling and whatnot. So a lot of work first year. It's pretty typical. You spend about a tenth of the aircraft's value on your first annual when you buy the aircraft. That's not unheard of. We definitely hit that mark. But now we have an aircraft in really good shape, and now we're coming to this next annual, and we're going to, I think the only thing we're doing outside of the typical annual and the upgrades we want to do is we got to replace one of the tires because it's got a flat spot. So granted, tires aren't cheap, but that's a pretty cheap annual compared to our previous one. So
yeah, and you're probably bringing down the cost quite a bit now that you're bringing on partners. How many partners do you guys have right now?
So my partner and I, we kept the aircraft for about a year, so it was the two of us, and we owned it 50-50. We had 50-50, we had bought in, and then we were holding the other 50% in a loan with the plan of adding 2 more members and then owning it fully. So we don't have any lien on the aircraft. We own it completely, which is really nice, and it gives us a lot of, a lot less stress and a lot more flexibility, and also reduces the price considerably. When it was the two of us, I'm going to say our operating costs, call that 100%. When we came around this year, we've flown it for a bit. We understood the aircraft, and in end of January, we started adding the partners as we had initially planned. We had the first partner, and he onboarded in March, and that dropped the cost of ownership, the monthly cost of ownership down about 66% from the original value. My monthly overhead of just owning the plane dropped 66%. And my operational costs also dropped a bit as well. Then we added the fourth person, that dropped it even further for a total of 75%. So now it costs me a quarter of what it did last year to own the aircraft. And that's just my monthly cost. That's monthly cost being insurance, hangar costs. We don't have a loan anymore, so that as well. And we are putting a buffer, a $5,000 a year buffer towards annual. So when we come into annual every year, we have $5,000 to work with, which is more than enough for what we need for the aircraft right now. It's about a basic annual runs about $2,300 in our current location who we're doing the annual with. And then anything on top of that would be more. So the tire is probably going to be another maybe $500, $700 for the tire. And then there's some upgrades we want to do. We want to swap out the seat belts and put a better engine monitor, and that's going to be a few grand there. But overall, it's dropped the cost down tremendously. There's 2 types of costs we looked at. So those are the fixed costs that are dropped down tremendously, and then the operating costs or variable costs. Those are like your reserve. So I mentioned that $40,000 overhaul that you run into after 2,000 hours or so. When you're flying the plane, you're kind of throwing in a few bucks. We throw in like $45 every hour towards that overhaul. So when we get to that 2,000 hour or 1,800 hour TBO, we have $40,000 sitting there ready to go, and we can apply that right to the overhaul. So we kind of been preparing for that as we get towards that date. And then we can go through that. And it's not a financial burden on us. We're not taking a loan, or we're not, emptying our pockets out for something like that. The other one we have is a reserve for things like oil changes or general maintenance. Or some people will add a reserve for avionics upgrades, a few bucks here every hour towards an avionics upgrade. Depends on the group. So that kind of comes in your variable, your hourly costs. And what's nice about that is if you have a plane or you're flying the plane more than I am, you're going to see more of those costs, and you're running it closer to this. You're going to put more wear and tear on the engine per se because you're flying it more. So then you're going to be contributing more towards that wear and tear. If I'm flying it less than someone like myself, or if I'm flying it more, then I'm going to contribute more to that. So it really keeps it fair and honest.
Man, this is not how I expected this whole conversation to go. I feel like we got into so many technical things that
Yeah.
I'm eating up. This was really, really interesting.
There's a lot.
I think I covered. There is a lot, and I know that we didn't even cover everything, but now I have a decent taste of what it all takes to own a plane and maintain it and whatnot.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to go ahead? Sorry.
Yeah. And to get back to the cost thing, now we've reduced the cost as much as we have. This really has turned into a car payment for me. So that's what I love about it, because I don't have a car payment. I've paid off my vehicle. So this is my car payment. And what better car payment to have than to be able to go use that towards flying airplanes. So anyways, go back to you. What were you saying?
Does that car payment include everything but the hourly? So if you were to hop in your car, you're paying for gas to get from point A to point B, but if you're hopping in the plane, all you're doing is paying for gas and the hourly. So it's probably much more efficient if you're going a farther distance.
It doesn't work out that way entirely. It's close though. Okay. I'll say, let's see, I'm doing 140 miles an hour and I'm spending maybe after gas, it's probably about $120, $130 an hour. So it's about $1 per mile, or kind of closing in on that number. I don't think driving's still a little more cheaper, but you're getting there faster. You're paying for time, basically, right? What I would do when I was in Wisconsin, I'd fly up to Door County a bunch, and it would be a 4-hour drive. It would be stressful. I'd get up there, I'd be exhausted. When I got the plane, I'd book it for the weekend, and we'd go up. I get up to 5,500. I'm flying up there. I put on autopilot. I kind of kick back, get up there in an hour versus 4 hours. I land and I come in and I'm relaxed. I'm not stressed out about all the driving I just did or the traffic or anything like that. Because there's really no that traffic up there. Maybe there's a few other planes, but we coordinate and it's easy. Come down, land. I can enjoy my weekend a lot more. Not only from the driving aspect, but even when I get up there, my Friday, when I get up there, I'd be exhausted and I'd want to go to bed. Now I get up there on Friday and I'm like, hey, I'm great. I got up here in an hour. I'm relaxed. I'm ready to go. I can enjoy my Friday. So it's just very, you get a lot more time back than just the actual flight time.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're also splitting those hourly costs with people if you are taking, co-pilots and stuff. So that kind of spreads it out a bit.
Yeah. So
now, this is great.
Yeah. FAA is pretty tight on that as far as, using the plane, quote unquote, for hire. But if you're doing things for like a mutual benefit, so say you and I say, hey, we want to go grab lunch somewhere and we're going, together for same cause, things like that. That's when we can then split the cost. So there's 4 of us, we can split it 4 ways. If there's 2 of us, we split it 2 ways, and it's just got to be even, really. That's their comment.
Gotcha.
But yeah, no, it does really cut those costs down, and suddenly, sometimes it's advantageous, right? Sometimes it works out in their favor.
Yeah. This is very cool, man. Is there anything else you want to get into before we start wrapping this up? Otherwise, I think I covered everything and more that I wanted to touch on.
I guess it's It's a really good time. It's a lot of fun. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I know we covered a lot of stuff, so but it was good.
Yeah, I just didn't
It's a
know
really
if
good time.
we glossed over anything that you wanted to get into in any more depth. Is there any shout outs or handoffs you want to give? I know you have like a public page on Instagram that sometimes you post photos and videos of. If you want to shill that,
Yeah.
feel free.
Yeah, so I do have an Instagram that I use. It's cool_cheddar, so cheddar without the R. If you remember, that was my nickname back in college, is cheddar. So cool_cheddar_vibes. That's an Instagram handle I use. I've got my car stuff on there. I do a little bit of photography with the cars. That's my other project, my other expensive hobby, sports cars, and then the airplane stuff as well. So do a little bit of that, and then if you check out that one, you might see a link to Mr. Ace. It's a friend of mine, neighbor. He's starting to do some Instagram, YouTube stuff where he's reviewing things, and we've got some videos that we shot with the plane. He's working on one right now that he's happened to lease in the next couple days. We got to do a couple extra shoots, and then he'll shoot it out, probably YouTube. But it's just the fun times flying and all the adventures you can go on. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this knowledge with me. This was really fun and I learned a lot. Thank you for listening to the Type 2 Fun podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a follow and feel free to reach out to say hello, give feedback, or share your Type 2 Fun story.